Okay, good evening. Welcome to our UUCA Adult Religious Education class. And we are so excited this evening to have the third part of 3, our final session for UUCA and citizen advocacy teaming up together. And a big thank you to our presenters. I will begin with lighting the chalice, and I have 2 quotes to share. The first one is from Marian Anderson. No matter how big a nation is, it is no stronger than its weakest people. And as long as you keep a person down, some part of you has to be down there to hold him down. So it means you cannot soar as you might otherwise. And our second quote comes from Martin Luther King Jr. The ultimate measure of a person is not where one stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where one stands in times of challenge and controversy. Okay, with that, I will light our chalice. Come on, match. Ooh. Beautiful. Lovely. Okay. So yes, this is just a really dynamite crew. Our presenters, amidst combined together, these 3 individuals, Erin and Katie and Marnie, have decades of expertise, lots of degrees and titles, lots of hats they have worn. So yes, I'm not going to read them all again, but I just wanted to really acknowledge and honor all that they have put together. And also a big thank you to Citizen Advocacy of Atlanta and DeKalb for sponsoring this opportunity. So to have the opportunity to see the 3-part, the quick version of a much longer week-long, very in-depth training, we are very grateful. So with that, I will turn it over to our presenters, and we are so grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That was a very enthusiastic welcome. I appreciate it. And welcome to everyone. Thanks for coming back. Let's see, on the screen, do you see a slide? It's like a title slide with all 3 weeks. Okay, great. And I'm going to just get I like to see the gallery view so I can see all of your faces. So I was just putting that over my slides. So thank you. I want to do a quick recap just in case someone is just joining us for the first time and hasn't seen the recordings. And so this was put together as a 3-week series where we were talking about social devaluation, heightened vulnerability, the impact to people who are marginalized, and then tonight is finally, yay, the remedies from SRV, social role valorization, and the citizen advocacy framework. So tonight is where you'll get some ideas for how to proceed and how to combat devaluation. So this first slide here with all of these arrows is kind of a quicker than a 3-week course, or 1.5 hour course, not 3 weeks, recap of what happens to people who are devalued, or what happens when people experience devaluation. And so the first thing that we talked about the first week was, and I didn't realize that he had builds in them. So the first thing we talked about in the very first session was what our society as a whole values, not your personal individual value system, but in general, what our society values as a whole. And we talked about these things here on the top of this slide with the green arrow and the check mark, like wealth and material goods and health, beauty of body, youth and newness. All of these things here listed are things that are highly valued in our society. Competence, independence, and intelligence, productivity and achievement, adult individualism, and having unrestrained choice, having what you want available to you at any time, as well as pleasure and happiness as a way of life. And so then we look to what it is that gets devalued in our society, and it's the opposite of all of these things we listed that our society values. So it's poverty and lack of goods, sickness, not beautiful bodies, old and things that are old, being dependent, incompetent, being unproductive and wasteful, having a lack of choices, and a life that has pain, hardships, and trial. And so this just speaks to kind of the conditions and then how it shows up in the lives of people that we stand beside and we support, is that people themselves get devalued because they embody these conditions. They represent what it is that's the opposite of what's highly valued in our society. So people with low income, people who don't have beautiful bodies, people who are dependent upon others, people who are seen as not being competent or capable, people who are seen as being unemployable, or people who are unemployed. All of these people experience devaluation and are really cast into devalued status in our society. And then when that happens, that's your first arrow point here. Then people get profoundly rejected. And last week, Marnie told the story of Linda, who she was in a citizen advocacy relationship with, and walked us through Linda's experience throughout her life of relentless rejection that came from family members and from service providers when she was needing support from a service system that's built and exists supposedly to support people and to have their needs be met. Linda experienced rejection from that, and from community members and from healthcare providers, just relentless, ongoing, lifelong rejection. And so that's the second kind of consequence or wound here that happens when people are devalued. And then we went into last week multiple roles, the negative roles, devalued roles that people get thrust into. These are not roles that anyone wants to take on, but people get thrust into and really stuck. So people are seen as being a menace and treated that way. People are seen as being an eternal child and surrounded with childlike activities and childlike things because people expect them to only want to do childlike things. Other roles that we talked about are people are the object of pity. People are seen as a burden. And so we went through many of those negative roles last week. And then we talked about how people get distanced from folks who have a valued status. So from ordinary, typical, everyday folks, people that we're talking about who live in devalued status are distanced. And they're distanced one of two ways, either physically, like physically separate, segregated, congregated only with other people who also live in devalued status, and then also distanced socially. So that shows up when we other people and treat them as other, less than, different, and avoid interacting with people and are dismissive of folks. So physical distancing and social distancing are another consequence of what happens when people live in devalued status. And then we talked about how people are denied opportunities and access, and how people, because they're denied opportunities and access, they don't have entry points into valued social roles, which is what we're going to talk about this evening. Because of the lack of opportunity and because of all of these other, because they're stuck in these negative roles, because they've been profoundly rejected, and because they've been distanced. And so we talked about that impact when people are denied opportunities and access. And then finally we ended the evening last week talking about how people who are devalued are subjected to discrimination, how people experience higher rates of social and physical abuse, how people experience more violence. And then we talked about Dr. Wolfensberger's phrase, death making, which is the hastening of death, ending one's life sooner than it should be. So that is a very quick recap of where we were in the last 2 weeks. And I think, yeah, that was like less than 8 minutes. So we're ready to proceed. We were curious first, at the end of last week, we had some extended study if anybody was interested in listening to the Radio Lab podcast here. And so I want to see if folks were able to look this up in here. If we could have some discussion about this, or if there were any questions from that quick recap, or from burning questions from the last 2 weeks that we didn't get to last time because we really ran up until 9 o'clock last time. I'm just going on mute because my fan on my computer is not being very friendly and it's kind of loud.
Did anybody get a chance to listen to the podcast? So a couple of things that I think might be a good kind of jumping off point from a discussion. When you listen to this podcast, when you go back to that arrow slide, Katie, can you flip back up to it if you don't mind? You know, we oftentimes will call these the wounds that end up happening to people who are devalued. And while they may not actually be physical wounds, oftentimes they are wounding to people's souls. So what wounds off of this list, as well as specifically around being cast into negative roles, did people see or hear, I guess, since it was a podcast, from listening to the podcast? And you can either come off mute or you can type. Either way, it's good either way.
I can make a case for all of them.
Expand on that a little bit, Bo, if you don't mind.
Well, starting from the bottom, physical abuse, violence, and death making. Involuntary surgery, involuntary sterilization. I think that counts as physical abuse, violence, and potentially death making. Discrimination. How do you get picked out for that kind of physical abuse, violence, and death making? Denied opportunities to have a child, distance from people with the valued status of being able to have a child, cast into negative devalued roles of not being worthy of having a child, are then profoundly rejected. I mean, you're just working from the bottom to the top, you can just line them all up.
I think this is fairly typical of people who live in devalued status, right? Is that they experience all of this. Is why we call these the common life experiences of devalued people, because it's very common. Anybody else? I think what came up in the chat? Something there.
I was especially taken by the system of it, like the people in the valued roles in the system have all the power, and so just a quick phone call, and yeah, we can arrange for that sterilization. Sure, yep, just fill out this quick little form over here. Thank you. Yes, we understand. Yes. So I just heard, we'll make it easy for you. So it just dripped with the system.
And a thing to consider, I mean, like, to me, taking away people's reproductive rights, like, that is like gigantic on the scale of things that people can do and are able to do. So just think about all of the other opportunities and rights and access that a person who has that kind of control over them is being taken away just on a daily basis. I mean, from who they can associate with, to where they can shop, to, I mean, where they live, who they choose to live with. I mean, everything is controlled. And, this is specifically about people who are under conservatorships. But this is very common for people who actually don't have any of their legal rights taken away. That don't have guardians and conservators, that their lives are highly controlled by the service system that is supposed to be helping them. I mean, that's their stated goal.
I mean, it's a complete lack of autonomy or any choice. I had a guy once described to me, he lives in a 3-person home where 3 people live who all have disabilities, and they have waiver supports, and so there are people in the home who are paid to support them. And he talked about how because of things he's done previously, and he said he's not doing that anymore, but they still won't let him use the restroom with the door closed. like won't let him, and like there's a lot of allow. We're trying to have a retreat for some self-advocates, people with disabilities, who with COVID, who are all vaccinated and have negative COVID, negative COVID tests. So this has all been, fluid. And one lady says, well, I don't know if they're going to let me come. And it's that kind of, she's in a leadership committee. There are only 10 people who are invited. Like, we need her in her role as a leader to participate. But because she lives in one of these group homes that has, hierarchy and has control over her, essentially, and it's not false control. Like, she really believes they may not let her come. And it's true. Like, we had to go through 3 different levels of folks at that agency to tell them that it really wasn't their decision and that we were going to support her. So, but it's those kinds of examples all the time, which happens because of these wounding experiences.
And it's very easy for us, people who live in valued status, and oftentimes unconsciously, for our minds to go to what we think is what should happen, right? It's the reproductive rights thing seems like a far cast, but there's lots of people who really think people with disabilities ought to live together. Don't they all like each other? That sort of thinking is ingrained into us. We have to consciously try to stop it, and that's part of the reason why we go through these wounding life experiences like we do, because it's a consciousness awakening, so that we're aware of it, that it's happening. So, anybody else have any other comments, questions? All right.
Okay, so as we promised, tonight we'll get into some of the remedy. And this is just a slide with a quote about social role valorization is one of our ways to combat devaluation. And so this says that social role valorization, or what we say is SRV, is one of the best ways to understand and address issues of marginalization, oppression, and exclusion of people who are devalued in our communities. And so we're going to talk about social role valorization as a practical tool that can combat devaluation for the folks that we've been talking about, people who citizen advocacy aims to support and to match with ordinary citizens, so that folks can have valued roles and move out of some of those negative roles. So we'll be talking about that, how SRV, as well as citizen advocacy. So as this slide, we just added this here that says citizen advocacy is a direct response to devaluation. Citizen advocacy has its own set of principles which are steeped in social role valorization, and we'll be talking about personal action and relationships and interpersonal identification, and we've got some stories for you to learn more about this tonight too. And so here's some photos that Marnie's going to talk about with some stories.
Perfect, Katie, thank you very much. So let's review again what exactly we mean when we say citizen advocacy. So citizen advocacy is a program, Citizen Advocacy of Atlanta DeKalb, where people like Aaron and Dorona go out into the community and they meet people, specifically people with disabilities, developmental disabilities. That is their charge. But you could think about citizen advocacy in a lot of ways, but citizen advocacy for people with disabilities is what Citizen Advocacy of Atlanta DeKalb is, their focus is. And they go out and they meet people who are really at risk or actively being abused or neglected, or at risk of being abused and neglected. And they get to know them and think about who they are, probably in a deeper way and with more commitment than possibly anyone has thought about them in many, many, many years. And try to get to know them and their interests and, what kinds of things are they into, and then they go out in the community and find a person who's just living an everyday typical life and match them with the person with the disability. And the idea is that you get protection through relationship. This is not uncommon. We all do this, right? I mean, we know this is how one of our major ways of protection is the people who know us protect us. If you don't show up to church on Sunday, there's a good chance that somebody's going to say, huh, man, we haven't seen Elizabeth in several weeks. What's going on there? But if you don't have anyone in your life that isn't paid to be in your life, or somebody else who is actually also highly devalued, it puts you at risk. It puts you at risk of lots of negative things, but it also puts you at risk of just being extremely lonely. So that is kind of the citizen advocacy, and the relationship, the building is the direct response to all of the arrows. It is how all of those wounding life experiences, citizen advocacy thinks about them and constructs the relationships around that. These pictures here are of Gwen and Corey. Are on the left-hand side. Gwen and Corey are in a citizen advocacy relationship, actually in Milledgeville, Georgia. And here they're out doing something typical. They're in a grocery store shopping. So Gwen helps Corey oftentimes, with managing his money and keeping his apartment, up to date, and getting him to and from the grocery store and all of that sort of thing. So that's part of their relationship. And then on the other side of that, we also have Brendan, Mylene, who are, everybody, we probably all have been to, a celebration at one of these Japanese hibachi grill, fried rice places. So, here they are, they're in a typical relationship, they're out there having dinner together, and you might say, huh, that's kind of interesting. So how is that protecting anybody? Well, it's protecting them through relationships. So what I want to talk about is actually some of the principles of citizen advocacy. So the guiding principles, the foundation of which citizen advocacy sits on, and how that relates directly back to those wounding life experiences. Okay, so we're going to talk about that. So the first thing we want to think about, so we asked, that very first wound that we talked about when we get to wounding is rejection. And I, told the story of Linda and all of that profound rejection. So first and foremost, coming out of the gate, citizen advocacy, for the most part, unless it's something that's very specific to be short-term, is asking for long-term commitments to relationships. Long-term, sometimes meaning lifelong. And there are citizen advocacy relationships that at this point in time have been in existence for 40 plus years throughout the state of Georgia. So that's what we mean by long-term. And we're also asking for people to really and truly think about loyalty, okay? So being loyal to the person with whom they are matched, and loyalty to that person, not loyal to the service system that surrounds them, not loyal to maybe even what their parents want, depending on what's going on, but to have that person front and foremost in their mind, so that they are in a long-term, lifelong relationship. And those are direct responses in the principles to this fact that people experience profound rejection. There's an old joke in the social work world where the new social worker comes in and says, "Hi, I just wanted to introduce myself before I leave." And it's very common that this revolving door of people moving in and out of people's lives. So that's, that over and over rejection, it sends a message to people. So long-term, sometimes lifelong asks is what citizen advocacy is asking for. When we think about the negative valued, the negative social roles. So, menace, burden, child, client, all of the negative social roles that people oftentimes get cast into. Citizen advocacy at its underpinning is focused on valued social roles. So that is the direct, the counterweight to all of the negative social roles. We're thinking about valued social roles for people. So let's just think about right here with Gwen and Corey. You might not even think about this, but right here, Corey is actually in the role of truly being a shopper in a grocery store, right? So that is part of what he's actually learning to do, so that at one point in time, he could probably go to the grocery store himself. So he's in that valued role. Corey's also in the valued role of actually being a friend, which is something that, a lot of times people have no access to. So people can get embedded in these negative roles. And so citizen advocacy is thinking about the people, who they are, and what valued roles actually make sense for these particular people. Corey's interested in art. So thinking about being an artist, right? And the valued role of artist. And so part of what Gwen would do is actually think about, okay, so where do artists go? What do they do? And trying to work with Corey in order for him to be able to move into the role of artist. And the power of that is that when you see people in positive roles, you're more likely to have a positive interpretation of them, right? We all know this. I'm dressed up in my nice clothes for a reason, right? Because what we do matters and how we look matters. So when we're in the role of artist, people see us as an artist. We don't see us as somebody who has a disability or somebody who's highly devalued. Okay, so does that make sense for people? The other part about roles that I'll say that's within the framework of citizen advocacy, the principles, is that citizen advocacy also takes a very conscious effort to have all kinds of people be in leadership roles. Okay. So actually on the board of directors, actually part of the core group, part of the decision makers for organizations are people that are highly devalued. And that's a conscious effort because the founders of citizen advocacy know is we've got to counterbalance all of those negative roles. We're also looking for really very strong community relationships. So we're constantly encouraging advocates, that was a slip, encouraging advocates to do valued things with valued people in valued places, right? So if Corey's interested in art, Gwen isn't going to the special art class that they have once a month at the day program, right? We're looking for valued things in valued places with valued people. Why is that? Because we know that people are carried down. It's again that counterbalance. Okay, so we're very, very, very conscious that we know that we are the company that we keep. So that is embedded within the principles of citizen advocacy. We also know that environments matter. Where we meet people matters, that if we are in a stressful environment, in an environment where it is very chaotic, we are more likely to make a negative judgment. That is human nature. We can't help it. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. So citizen advocacy tries its best to be very conscious about the first impression. So we know when that first impression is made, that it is more likely to be a positive impression. Okay, and that's just human nature, frankly. So those are some things that they do specifically around the negative roles. Okay, so distancing, social distancing, physical distancing. This is a huge part of life for people who are devalued. Citizen advocacy derives itself from the community and of the community. right? It should be the least distance thing. And when we talk about in the community, we actually mean in the community, the big community, not in the community, which often gets in our social services, which means a group of 10 people going to Walmart. That is not what we mean. Smaller groups, which is why citizen advocacy also is a one-on-one relationship, because we know that that is the soil of approachability is better when we have small groups. Big, large groups of people who are devalued, oftentimes it's like, that's kind of odd. And as human nature, we'll back away from that. But if you have one person who is with someone who is in a valued role, who's valued in their society, it's that's the soil of approachability, right? And it's in the community. All right, hold on, I'm just checking my notes. All right, the other piece is that we actually, citizen advocacy actually also limits its interaction consciously with the human service world, okay? And that is, in order to make sure that it actually is of the community, also helps conflict of interest and loyalty, right? So if we have a lot of people on our board of directors who are human service workers, it is a very human nature that their loyalty is going to be to their job, not to the person. So we generally do not recruit people who are human service workers to be citizen advocates because of that as well. And so, and that is a big part of the distancing piece, is going ahead and trying to break that so that we can have people included within the framework of the community. People we know are denied opportunities and access. So people are living very, very congregated and segregated lives. I cannot talk about this enough. And I think part of the reason why we don't see a lot of people with disabilities in our world is because they are so well congregated and segregated. You actually just don't see them. And if you do, it's usually in a big group.
And this is even, even before COVID. Like this is,
oh yes,
like
this is
all the time. This is the true life experience of people with disabilities, is they've been kept apart in a way. Now they're,
and I have actually heard human service workers say that COVID's actually made their life easier because then they can actually stay home and it's actually okay. So people whose worlds are already small are now not leaving their houses, and no one is allowed to come into their house for fear of COVID. So this is, yes, I think that is thank you for making that point, Katie. This is, very congregated and segregated and grouped lives together. So when we talk about having opportunities denied, citizen advocacy sometimes is actually getting people out physically from behind locked doors, okay? So that's important to remember, that there are people that literally are locked behind doors. The person that Katie was talking about who wants to be coming to the self-advocacy retreat, I mean, there's really no other way to describe that. She's behind a locked door. Somebody else is controlling that. And sometimes it is a literal locked door, like the locked ward of the nursing home that Linda Davis was living on. Nursing facilities. I don't know how many of you guys have been in a nursing facility even pre-COVID, but you hardly ever go in one now where you don't actually have to pass through a locked door to get in or out. It is constantly monitored all of the time. So, that is the ultimate in denying people access, right? Sometimes when we think about, access and building community, and it's more organic than that. It's not just actually, grabbing people out from behind locked doors. It's really just introducing people to their circle of friends, right? So, when we look over here at Brenda and Mylene in this picture, this is, Brenda's there with Mylene is there with all of Brenda's friends. So through that, she now knows more people, right? And through that, that's more opportunities that are out there for a person to have a richer, bigger life. Does that make sense for people? All right. So last but not least, actually probably the most important is when we talk about discrimination and death making and abuse and neglect. In the end, this is the highest order of work of citizen advocacy because this is prevalent. People with disabilities are way more likely to be abused, to be neglected. The numbers are actually astonishing when it comes to that sort of thing. So this is the direct response, and advocates sometimes are actually getting into the fray of my protege gets admitted to the hospital and immediately they want to put a do not resuscitate order on someone for something as simple as a urinary tract infection. This is not uncommon, okay? So that is, the highest order of what citizen advocates oftentimes have to do, is they actually are directly addressing abuse and neglect. They also are directly addressing violations of people's rights. So citizen advocates have helped people get their voting rights restored. Actually, people who haven't even had their voting rights taken away, but have been told that they can't vote, which isn't actually true. And of course, now to vote in the state of Georgia, you have to have an ID. Well, that actually turns out to be a big problem for a lot of people with disabilities who don't have good access, don't even know what their real first names are. They have been known by initials their entire lives because that's how they were admitted into state institutions. It becomes difficult for them to vote. So going through all of that, a friend of mine helped the woman that he was matched with get an ID in order to be able to open a bank account. I mean, like just the simple things in life around, your rights and all of that sort of thing, up to and including stepping in when people are actively being killed. That is the hard work of it. So that really is the framework and the understanding of citizen advocacy. Its linchpin, the relationship piece, is based on valued roles and direct response to the negative life experiences. Jerome or Aaron, do you have anything that you'd like to add? Just on that, on that note, as far as principles and that sort of thing go?
Yeah, I think you went through everything really well. I think one of the biggest parts of citizen advocacy is really that intentionality. So in every step of the way, being intentional in recognizing where people have been wounded throughout their lives, and first not adding to those wounding experiences in the same time as trying to match two people together to go from wounded experiences to valued experiences. So in each one of those steps, there's so many different ways, even from, we intentionally are looking to recruit citizen advocates for just a few people at a time, because we know each of those people deserves to have the attention on them, and as an organization, our attention to finding an advocate in good time for them. Because again, waiting is another form of that rejection and continued on. So it's continued intentionality through every step of the process. And yeah, I don't know if Dorona has anything to add, but thanks, Marty. That was a great run through of the principles and social role valorization.
I would like to bring to bear the idea of citizen advocacy raising up the value and principle of independence. We keenly believe that when people are specifically selected and intentionally matched with someone, that they can be supported through just ordinary means to act on someone's behalf independently. And that independence is power for a citizen advocate, that their loyalty to their protege means that they can be independent, not just from family and from human services systems, but even from the citizen advocacy program. Because once you become aligned with someone, you're going to know that person much better even than Aaron and I might in the process of matching them. And an ordinary person is able to act upon what they know is best and right in on behalf of someone's interests. Independence is empowering. The human services system really works to strip ordinary people of power. The system is the answer in their opinion, and it's a top-down process that keeps people clientized and keeps people commoditized. An independent citizen advocate can act out of what they know is best and right for human beings, and specifically for their particular friend and relationship. We uphold that principle of independence very high.
I love that. And when someone becomes a citizen advocacy, or when they're introduced to the idea, they go through workshops like this, or they learn about like the wounds that people have experienced and how to be more conscious about it, right? So that they can, right?
Yes.
Right.
There's a lot about raising people's consciousness.
We spent a lot of time actually talking about that today. One of the things we know in citizen advocacy is that unconsciousness is the enemy to devalued people. So when we're speaking specifically, whether in groups or to individuals, this understanding of the power of social roles, of valued social roles, is a way to lift the consciousness of individuals toward their neighbors. Because like Marnie and both Katie, you just said, we don't see people with disabilities, and we don't even know to ask why.
And even from like a very young age, like if you have young children and you ask the young children if they see any people at school who have disabilities, like I have a 8-year-old and a 12-year-old, and I mean they're already learning from kindergarten that kids with disabilities need something other than what they need, that they need something special. And so then without some intense consciousness and being in the world, the ways that we want to be in the world, and to have relationships with people who experience devaluation, they would think that that is what's expected, that is okay, that is needed even. I mean, when it's really actually the opposite of what people need from a very young age. And that's when one of those wounds of being denied opportunities and access after being distanced, right? Because people who are pulled out of ordinary, typical classroom opportunities and sleepovers at friends' houses and youth groups and all of those kinds of things, because there's a special separate world, then that just, continues on. It's this trajectory of lifelong devaluation. And so that's why I think the like being super intentional and raising people's consciousness about how this happens, why it happens, the experience of people, the impact of people, so that then you can go and be even more urgent about standing with someone and making sure that they are seen, as Marnie said, and a couple of times, in valued places with valued people, doing things that are ordinary, typical of values, certainly not the stereotypical negative roles that people often find themselves in.
It's an opportunity to confront some of those negative assumptions that are so deeply ingrained in our culture. Like you said, from the time people are very young, as children, children with disabilities are often highly serviced, even from a very young age, where everything's special. It's play therapy, it's music therapy, it's a different bus to school. There's all the things that keep people separate, even from a young age. And then the assumption by culture becomes, well, there must be a special place for people like that. There must be a special way that people have to be treated. It must be the way if people get to go to the mall together in groups of 12. So we as a culture begin to assume that that is the way it's supposed to be, and even defer then to the presumed experts on how people with disabilities are to live their lives. Citizen advocacy addresses that through the power of these personal relationships.
Thanks, guys. That's good. Yeah, I mean, this is the power of relationships, and we know this intimately. We click to the next slide, Katie. All of this also, I just want to mention this. All of this also is designed and built around increasing people's interpersonal identification. So if you see yourself in others, you actually walk a few minutes in their shoes, you are more likely to identify with them. And Dr. Wolfensberger said this quote, we think is really powerful. The more people identify with each other, the more they are likely to want good things to happen to each other, and the more they are likely to do or provide good things to each other. So increasing your interpersonal identification with people who are devalued is a really powerful tool, and citizen advocacy is a really powerful way to be able to do that. Because when you see people and like people and know people, you want good things for them, and you're more likely to do good things to make sure good things happen for them.
It goes back to, I mean, even to be able to identify with someone, you have to have your consciousness raised, right? And it can then help you deconstruct what we talked about in the first couple of weeks, the us versus them kind of mentality or approach that is often common and I guess somewhat valued in our society. So, okay, so we're going to go to the principles.
So this brings us to the Unitarian Universalist Association's 7 principles. So why are we here talking about citizen advocacy, right? I think part of the reason why we're here talking about citizen advocacy is because it actually closely aligns with the principles of the Unitarian Church, right? I mean, when you think about this, the inherent worth and dignity of every single person. And I don't know that that needs any really more explanation. I mean, if we're really thinking about the inherent worth and dignity of every person, you know, people with disabilities, that's part of this. This is a large group of devalued people that aren't showing up oftentimes in huge places in our society. Justice, equity, compassion, and human relations. I mean, that is citizen advocacy, right? Acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations, right? And this is, you know, we think about this oftentimes for other groups of devalued people. And I am certain that your church is thinking about this with respect to race and sexual orientation and, you know, other religious beliefs and other. I'm going to guess you guys probably are doing active outreach around people who are immigrants. You know, all of that sort of thing. But I think because of unconsciousness, we've left out people with disabilities who are among the most devalued. A free and responsible search for truth and meaning, the right of conscience, and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and society at large. Think about people with disabilities. They're oftentimes, this is, you know, they get excluded from all of that higher order thinking. We make assumptions about what they can and can't do. Going back to the podcast, make assumptions that people can't be parents. And you even hear the young woman who thought it about herself, right? She had already embedded that into her head. She's, oh my gosh, I can't be a parent. There's no way. There's no way I'm going to be able to do this, right? That becomes self-fulfilling prophecy. The goal of a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. I mean, you know, we're thinking about all and respect for interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. So, I mean, I think that the principles of citizen advocacy and the principles of the Unitarian Church, they mesh beautifully. I mean, this is a really wonderful way to think about, you know, other ways to live the Unitarian principles is through citizen advocacy.
And was just thinking when you were going through these that many of the folks I've met and I know now, when they talk about their spirituality or they talk about their faith and their church community, if they live in these segregated, congregated places like group homes, they don't get to practice what they want because of the staff convenience, because of all sorts of reasons. The intent doesn't matter. The reasons, it's what, not why, as we talked about, is the impact to the person, not the intent, and that they're left out from where they want to belong with the faith community because two other housemates or people that they live with are of different faith, and so then the staff are trying to negotiate all of this. I do think there was opportunity during COVID when everything turned to online, and that I think it's been missed opportunity for many folks. But people who wanted to belong and engage with the faith community could do so more in COVID because of, if they had access to a computer. But then that's also limited because people don't have access to their own email addresses. They're not supported to, increase their competencies in that way, to learn how to be on Zoom necessarily. And so when Marnie was thinking about this, like everyone, certainly with this first principle, has gifts and talents and things to contribute. And that's where citizen advocacy can come in, because with this one-on-one match, people can be really supported one by one, and then their relationships with other people who they're introduced to expand, and their opportunities expand. The roles, the valued roles that they then have access to expand, and it just creates a whole different world of opportunity and meaning for folks.
I want to say one more thing about this too, because we're talking about the people who are devalued a lot here and what their experiences are. And I want to go back to my personal citizen advocacy experience. So when I was matched, I didn't talk about this at all at the beginning, I don't think. But when I was matched with Linda in the citizen advocacy relationship, I was a technical manager for a mining company. And that relationship was so profound for me that I consider it actually to be a life-defining relationship. I changed my career. I left working for the mining company. I quit selling dirt and started working in citizen advocacy. The things that I was given, the gifts that I was given from Linda, the opportunities to learn, the laughs, the tears, all of it, that also is, it's part of the beauty of all of it. It's not, it's not this hierarchical power where the advocate's up here. And it really, we had a beautiful relationship where it was a give and take. And I learned more from Linda than I learned maybe from any one person in my life, because her experiences were so different than mine. But that is the other piece of this, is that, when you have a deep relationship with someone who is devalued, and this works for all people who are devalued, this is not just exclusive to people with disabilities. When you have those deep relationships, you are more likely to want good things and to identify. And once we know people and we want change for people. I mean, this is how the world works.
That's what Paula said in the chat box. Did you see that, Marnie?
I did not.
That's exactly what you're talking about. She said it's the same with every devalued group. You can think about racism. If you want to change the culture of racism, it starts with having a relationship with someone who is black, for example.
Yep. Exactly.
For citizen advocacy, what Maureen just described, one of those other principles that we really hold up is reciprocity, that even before it reaches to being a long point, people are being brought together based more on what they have in common rather than their differences. And there's opportunity for give and take. There isn't, like she said, the hierarchical approach. It's speaking to an advocate, we know that an advocate is going to benefit typically as much as the person who has the disability in that reciprocal relationship.
Right, it's more partnership and like doing with and together, which is completely the opposite of all the other, well, not all, but many of the other relationships in the lives of people who live in these places we're talking about and go to these day programs, because those relationships are power over them. Someone else controlling, and this is really with and partnership and doing together and seeing each other as equals, right? So, okay. So we're ready to move, Marnie?
Do it.
Okay. So the very first week we started, I think the very first things we did was a brainstorm, and this is what we came up with when we were talking about what are the good things in life in general before we talked anything about devaluation. So what would make a good life? What are the good things that matter to all of us? And so these are some of the things that you called out. We talked about intimacy and connection. We talked about community and belonging, doing things that you love to do, things that bring you joy. We talked about freedom and having autonomy, having love and relationships and marriage, satisfying work, ways to contribute, ways to feel valued. And then we showed, this was a graphic illustration of the things we're talking about that our friend and colleague with Citizen Advocacy, now is a board member in Savannah, drew. This is from Inky Brittany. And so here she talks about, or she depicts, she illustrates the good life is made up of feeling secure, having a nice place to live, having friendships and relationships, participating and contributing, being a part of a community, being part of a family, having a good job, or having ways to contribute and give back, having money and possessions, and having self-worth. And so then all of these things come about really because of valued social roles. And so valued social roles can bring about all of these things that we're talking about that make up a good life, or that fulfill one's life, like a full, meaningful, rich life, which is not what people that we've talked about who live in devalued status have I was going to say easy, but have access to really at all. Not nearly to the point where people who have valued roles, these things will come up, more naturally. People are more likely to have opportunities because of the valued social roles they have. You're going to have more sense of belonging, health and support, your material needs are met, safety and security, and all of these things that we've talked about raising our consciousness about. The people who live in devalued status, safety and security is a real threat. The violence, the death making, having just your potential wasted, not having purposeful work, or even being taught and supported to learn new things. Like everyone here is engaging in ongoing learning, right? You're coming together on Tuesday nights across many, many weeks to learn new things and to be a part of a group. That's completely, dismissed, ignored, missed when folks live in devalued status. And so Marnie talked a little bit about with valued roles having the, when she was talking about some of the principles and examples, that people have to also have the image that goes along with this, as well as the skills and competencies. And so we want to look at, we showed this before, and this is just to define social roles, because we often don't think about it. It's part of raising our consciousness too. For those of us who have a lot of valued roles, we think about, how busy we are, how engaged we are, but we don't really so much think about how they show up in our lives. And so this definition here is, a social role is maybe defined as a socially expected pattern of behavior, responsibilities, expectations, and privileges. So your role as a member of the congregation, with that, there are behaviors that you engage in, things you do, like the ordinary things you do. You have responsibilities. There are things that are expected of you. And then there are also privileges. And so that's what we're trying to think about when we support someone, one person, especially in a citizen advocacy relationship, to have a new role, be it a role of employee, or a role at a faith community, or a role as a student in an art class, as was one of the examples. And so it would not be, a disability related special kind of art class, but in general. And then we would be supporting that person to really understand kind of what you do when you go there. Especially because people don't have the practice and the experience of knowing what to do when they go a lot of places, because they've been segregated, sheltered, denied access. And then helping folks understand the responsibilities, what's expected of them. And then being, once you're deeply embedded in that role, having the privileges that come along with it too, like really having that sense of belonging, having people who miss you when you're not there and who check in on you. And it'll expand, I'm guessing, and we're going to have a story about this, from just the initial citizen advocacy relationship, because people like Linda really became a part of Marnie's whole world, and like Marnie's other friends and family got to know Linda, right? And so Linda had relationship with other people in that way. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about valued social roles, and how we can support people to have valued social roles. And here is a slide that talks about what social roles really offer us. And so Wolfensberger says here that roles give people a mental handle as to who a person is and how they should relate to them. And so if you think about, like, if you meet someone new at, not on Zoom, but like back in the days pre-COVID, when you would meet someone and you'd be standing there or sitting there, however, and someone would introduce you and say, hi, my name's Katie, and the person would tell you their name, and then the second question, or the second thing they're likely to say is, what do you do? And so this person is looking for your place in society. They're looking for you to name a role that they can possibly identify with, because maybe they have that same role, maybe they know someone who's in that same role, and they can place you in society, right? So roles give you a place, they give you status and reputation, and this list works for valued roles that we're thinking about now. It also works for those negative roles. If you're always seen as an eternal child, or if you're always seen as a menace, that impacts upon your status and reputation too, and people treat you differently, and you stay stuck and embedded in those roles. And so social roles also give us acceptance and belonging. So places where we belong, people, like we've talked about, will figure out why you're not there if you're not showing up with, in one of your roles that you're expected to be in and where you show up often. It's a place where you can be yourself. Roles impact upon your rhythm and routines. So they give you some structure to your day, some structure to your weeks, to your lives, really. Because as we talked about, people in value status have multiple roles, and all day long you're slipping in and out of a variety of roles. If you're a parent, you're in the role of being a parent. Maybe you're also a son or a daughter to your aging parents, and so that role can show up throughout the day, as well as your employee role, your citizen roles, like in your community, your role of neighbor, all sorts of, you're in and out of roles all day long. And that's not often the case for the people that we're thinking about who experience disabilities and really live in devalued status. They are predominantly trapped in these negative roles. And until someone intentionally comes along and supports someone one by one to get out of them, that's pretty much going to be their life. And it will just go through that arrow slide that we talked about with all the negative consequences, the wounding life experiences. And so that's why, it's this wonderful relationship and opportunity with citizen advocacy to support someone one by one, which brings these new opportunities, new roles, and new connections. You can think about, in the longer workshops we go through, and we do an exercise where you list all your roles, and then you think about who you met in those roles. You may have met your spouse in one of your roles as, a colleague or a student or a neighbor or from a friend. And so you can think about what the roles have expanded for you and the people you've met and the relationships you've gained, as well as any other associations. And certainly we've talked a lot about how people who live in devalued status lack autonomy and freedom. And that is true in these negative roles. In valued social roles, you have autonomy and you have freedom, and you are making your own decisions. You're certainly seeking input from other people at times when you want it, but you can take it or leave it because you have autonomy. You have your will. That's not true in that Radio Lab story, the audio story that we listened to for people who are under conservatorship or guardianship, and certainly not true even when folks haven't been to court but are deeply embedded in those client roles, folks who have lived in our institutions, who live in nursing facilities, who live in group homes, who sometimes live in host homes, or who sometimes live with family, are still deeply embedded in these client roles where they are seen as needing something separate, needing something special, needing something different than ordinary everyone else on their neighborhood street. I like Paula says, so some communities ask, who are your people? Which is great, because then you can get a sense like who else you know, and then the person's like also looking for how you belong, right? And looking for any commonalities so that you can build upon that interpersonal identification, because you're trying to know someone. Okay, so I think Aaron, we want to hear this story. And before you do this story, I want to share this slide. It's just a quote that I use a lot because I find it powerful. It's, when someone is truly included, no one will question their presence, only their absence.
All right. So tonight I have the honor to share just a small portion, just a small like glimpse into the story or of Kathy and Eric's story that they have done in the past and are continuing on for a long time in the future as their relationship continues to grow. So as you look at the photo, you see Kathy and Eric. And even to this point where this photo happens, there's a long story that happens for that. So Eric's family was originally from the Democratic Republic of Congo. They arrived in the United States in Clarkston as refugees. So I just that didn't speak English. They transported because of terrible things that are happening in their home country to the United States. So if we even just stop there, before we know anything else about Eric and his family, we can see already some of those negative social roles that Eric, just arriving in the United States day one, has put upon him. One, as a refugee, that's already bringing in a lot of the negative stereotypes that people have of, dependence, something different. They're non-English speakers. So definitely in the United States, speaking English is highly valued. So if we go back to those charts, then what's negatively valued is not speaking English. So just from day one, we already see some of these negative social roles that are put upon not only Eric, but his entire family. So as Eric gets to the United States, of course, here he is given the opportunity to start an education in public school. So in the meantime, Kathy and Eric have met through other ways and are starting to get to know each other. But Eric goes into public school, and as soon as he arrives, Eric is placed not only into just special education, but in a specific group within special education for the most profoundly disabled. People that the school, the social workers, the teachers have already determined are not going to even have a possibility of learning. And that's where Eric is placed to go spend every day. And again, I just want to pause and you think that's where Eric ends up there. And if he stayed in that situation for the rest of his life, where could you see the rest of his life going? Well, he could continue through school because he's guaranteed that, but he'd be in the separated, segregated, and congregated classrooms. He's already presumed not to be able to learn, not given an opportunity for education. And we can then see, most likely, Eric's going to spend after school his time in a day program, also congregated and segregated, and highly unable to experience those good things in life. Those are being limited and taken away just from general assumptions without anybody ever taking the time to listen to Eric. So one of the beautiful things as it starts in the ability to advocacy is Kathy comes into Eric's life, and she takes the time to listen to Eric and to get to know him. And one of the first things that she learns is, Eric's talking, he's speaking. Eric also knows several different languages. So this is a young man that the school has already said they've already deemed on his paperwork, no possibility of learning. But in his young life, he already speaks several different languages, including some English. So there's absolutely no reason that Eric should be put in this category of not being able to learn. So that really starts the journey of Kathy coming to Eric's life and really the advocacy role of making sure Eric is getting the real education that he deserves. And this is starting in elementary school, fighting through the system in there to make sure Eric is getting not only the right education, but is included in regular classes. And then you get through elementary school and you end up changing schools, all that work where you've started raising that consciousness of people around, because Kathy is modeling that Eric can do all these things and modeling that he should be included with the rest of his classmates. Then when middle school comes, you're working with a whole new set of people. And day one of middle school, what happens? Eric gets put in the profound, that same segregated classroom where he is not given any other chance to learn. So it happens again. Kathy goes back to the school and fights to make sure Eric is given that opportunity to learn and be as active and integral in his school community, not just in the education part, but be part of the actual school community. And now we get to the point today that this is the year that Eric started high school. So we've come through that again. And where we fight now is Eric has a big dream, and he lets that be known. And one of those things that, and it's very important to Kathy, is Eric not only wants to go to college, but he's got colleges picked out. And I'll tell you, just in the few years that I've known them personally, I already know he's switched from definitely wanting to go to Georgia Tech to the opposite, to definitely wanting to go to UGA. So he's got his eyes set in some places he wants to experience his college. But so that's kind of going, fast forwarding through the school and advocacy there. But I think the most important part where we get to is really a story from that took many years at the beginning and really shows that transition and where Eric has really found his strongest social role that's highly important. So we go back and remember Eric came as a refugee with his family not speaking much English. So Kathy knew what is valued and what is important and what would allow Eric to have the biggest life now that they're here in the United States. And that would be finding, working through the process for Eric and his family to become American citizens, to have that role of being an American citizen, which is, I think, for most people in the United States, probably the biggest, most profound social role that we have. We hold that very dear no matter what. So in that process, lots of things happen, and it's very bureaucratic. Giant bureaucracy is working when you're looking for citizenship. So that started with Kathy, working with Eric's mom to make sure that she was ready and prepared to pass her citizenship test. So she, entire family could be citizens. And then even more, there was just nothing was happening. So they'd gone through all the proper processes and it just stalled. Now, Kathy has played a lot of very highly valued roles in her life, and has the privilege to know a lot of people and is highly socially connected in her community and beyond. So when that came up, it was no question that what Kathy was going to do was she was not only going to work to try to get installed, but she was going to go to the top. And Kathy called her congressman directly. And the amazing part is she's just she is an ordinary citizen. She's not a politician. She's not anywhere there, but she knows that's that's our congressman. I can call them. So she called the congressman, and not just a couple days later, the paperwork for Eric's family came back through signed, and they got to the process. And what you see in this picture is as they are waiting, Kathy with Eric still supporting him and the family as Eric and his family officially became US citizens, which is just remarkable. And you can, what I really love about the two of them is just their faces together are just right there. But, once you become a citizen, as most of us here probably are, and we get to have that, it's what are you going to do with it? And Eric is definitely a man that knows that he wants to do something to not only change his life, but the life of everybody around him in the United States and beyond. And him and Kathy are continue to go on that journey, and Kathy continues to find ways to support what Eric wants to do as he continues forward. So you can go ahead and switch to the next slide. So that comes so many different ways. And like I said, over the years, their life and relationship is changing, but Kathy and Eric are still enjoying life, doing things and pushing towards the best good things in life. So this is a photo that really came around, I think just about a month ago. It is one of Eric's caretakers is a rock climber, and they're talking about rock climbing. Eric goes, I want to do that. So in that picture, you see his caretaker and Kathy. Eric went rock climbing. So if we go back and look back to that day in school where he's not going to learn, he's going to sit in his chair probably for the rest of his life. Now he's a US citizen and he's getting to explore the things that he wants to do that we'd all consider part of that good life. So a lot of this, as we go through in citizen-advocacy relationships, there is that advocacy part, that advocacy for education, that advocacy part for getting citizenship and all of that. But it really starts and it's all driven through the relationship. And relationships have every benefit. I don't have any single relationship in my life where it's just somebody does something for me. But we do things together, that some things we enjoy, some things that are hard, some things that are going to make us cry together. But we experience this life as a relationship, as a partnership. And now, as Eric, when they first met, he was a young little guy. Kathy could pick him up, take him wherever she wanted to go. But as you can see in this picture, he's turning into a big young man. And Kathy knows, I think as an old white lady now, might not be my time and space. I think Eric needs more people around him, that like his age, that have that similar interest. He can't just be hanging out with this old Jewish woman all the time. So, and that just goes back to still building that community. And it starts with who does Kathy just starts, who do I know? And what are opportunities that I have the ordinary power of helping Eric explore to meet more people. And that takes me really to, at the beginning of the pandemic this year, Eric really found community in his schools, and like not just in his classes, but with friends and different people and different activities. And when COVID hit, like everybody else, we all got stuck at home. And what happened is, there wasn't opportunities to go places, or, all of us had to be limited on that. And that was really, and Kathy talking to Eric really realized that was really hurting Eric a lot. That isolation was bringing up some of those older wounds of isolation that he had in his past. So what they did is Kathy found a way and started making sure Eric made it to the local coffee shop. And when I say local coffee shop, it's in Clarkston. It's Refuge Coffee, and it has a great outdoor space. So once a week, no matter what, whether it was Kathy or somebody else, Eric was going to go every Saturday morning and go to Refuge Coffee. And I really want to highlight this because it goes back to what Marty said, doing valued things with valued people in a valued place. Now, I've known Clarkston really well. I don't know how everybody here knows. If you haven't experienced Clarkston, you should. And right now, in this current time, Refuge Coffee is the social and cultural hub of Clarkston, which is Eric's home. It is the place to be. Any morning, you're likely to run into your city councilors, your mayors. You're going to run into directors of nonprofit, business leaders, lawyers, everybody. That's the place where everybody comes together. So doing valued things. Not going to lie, going to the coffee shop, having conversations, being out is extremely valued in our culture. It's something that lots of people do and want to do. Being with valued people. So being there, and this is the remarkable thing, Eric being there every week, just naturally being there, people started talking to Eric because he's there and part of it. And he started building his own network of people at that place. So he was doing valued things with valued people in a valued place. And what's really cool now is, as Eric's getting older, he's in high school, he's thinking about his future. That doesn't mean just college, but Eric sees himself, and he is a social justice leader in his community and across all of Atlanta. So not only is he going to Refuge Coffee Week, but he's holding board meetings for his own social justice group, where he wants to continue to not just advocate for himself, but as he puts it, I want to advocate for everybody that's like me, whether that's because they're from Africa or a refugee, or if they have a disability. But he wants to be part of that continued change that he has experienced and grown as him and Kathy have gone through that journey. And he wants other people to be able to experience that. And that really takes us to last week. I believe it was just last week. So again, it goes to, who do you know? And Kathy, with her connections, happened to know one of the former directors of the MLK Junior Center. And one of Eric's heroes, as he is a social justice leader, was Martin Luther King Jr. So not only was Eric going to the MLK Center, but he went on a specific tour and got to meet and be around some of those artifacts, and even was given some artifacts from his hero, MLK. And beyond that, it keeps going, is now Eric is going to go through a program to be a trained tour guide at the King Center. So that's even more opportunities for him to continue to grow in his leadership as a social justice leader in his community.
Thank you, Aaron. That's a great story. It really is. That's a heartwarming good one. Thanks. All righty. Just wrapping up. So let's, in conclusion, kind of think about what is it that we can do. First thing is raise your consciousness. We've said it several times. Be aware, look around, who's included, who's excluded, who's not there, who's devalued. What does that look like in your world? Recognize that there are negative stereotypes that are out there. Be conscious of that and do not reinforce them. Stop them in their tracks. If you see it happening, go ahead and shut it off. Identification, put yourselves in the shoes of other people. Valued places, doing valued things with valued people, right? We can do this in our everyday life. And this is important for interactions with all people who are devalued. And these are, not just people with disabilities. And really, honestly, last but not least, is to know the power of deep personal relationships. They are life-defining, life-changing. Kathy and Eric, I mean, this is where the rubber meets the road as far as life goes, in my opinion. It's really about relationships.
And we didn't write on here, but it would be to engage with citizen advocacy of Atlanta and DeKalb, right? And Bo also wrote in the chat box that he's a board member of Citizen Advocacy of Atlanta DeKalb. So you already know Bo, and he's willing to chat more. I know Aaron is.
Absolutely. And then last but not least, we covered the other 7 principles, but I left this one for last because I thought that it so kind of beautifully sums up what we've spent the last 3 weeks talking about, the 8th principle for the Unitarian Church. We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. This is the ask. As citizen advocacy, this is you live the 8th principle. So I just thought that that was a really good way to kind of tie it up. Questions? Comments? All right. Question, Marnie, is the independence principle why the citizen advocacy office encouraging the advocate is more accurate than the office asking the advocate to do something? Absolutely. Very intuitive. That is exactly right. You know, the office is there to help and guide, and I often say sometimes ask provocative questions, but in the end, the relationship is theirs between the two people. And, you know, so that they don't take direction directly from the citizen advocacy office. That is exactly right, the independence principle.
Hello, I want to say hi to everybody.
Hello.
It's good to see everybody again. Thank you all so much for putting all your time and hard work into these episodes. This is some really amazing stuff y'all are doing.
I agree. This is awesome material. Thank you so much for sharing it. I imagine there are a couple other questions that we'd like to address. And just before we do those questions, if we could take a brief moment for a quick poll, and this poll will just help us continue to improve our program. So it already popped up for you. If you'll just answer 3 quick multiple choice questions, this will be all of 30 seconds while you're thinking of your next question. Thanks for your help.
Sorry, Elizabeth, I forgot.
Oh no, you're doing great. Awesome. Yeah, everything we can do to make space and time for this great material and questions. I already have my question that I thought of. In the advocacy work and the relationships that citizen advocacy is forming, what's the range of duration of these relationships that get formed? How long does a relationship last between an advocate and a protege?
Right. Yeah. So I think one of the amazing things about citizen advocacy is, you know, we're not doing anything special. People are people and human beings, but what we can do is try to set up the best possibility for that long term. So as Marnie pointed out earlier, there's relationships that are currently going on here in Atlanta and DeKalb as well as around the state. That relationships are 40 years plus at this point, or a lot of relationships that have quite literally gone, through life, as either one of the protege or the advocate has passed away because they have been in their lives throughout that entire course. So what we do is we try to find those connections and that people have together, that they have the ability to have some of those like interests and to set up the best possibility for the relationships to be over the course of time and for the long term.
That's awesome.
And I say there's a distinction that I'd like to make about the duration of relationships. I like to use the phrase long lasting over long term. It's very distinct. I think there's a distinction there. We want to promote long lasting. It turns out that people have figured out how to make things long term, and that's really important. And we also, not frequently, but we leave the possibility open also throughout the course of a year that some people are in crises, and we will recruit on rare occasions, it's not the practice, people to enter into very specific short-term relationships to address a very specific or instrumental need for someone.
One more question I had is, I noticed in a lot of circles that the use of the word special, this is the special needs, or it's an adjective that runs around. And I would love to hear other options, or what has worked well in all of your, in just a language, like it's a language question.
Ooh. Can I answer this one?
Go ahead, Drona. Hit this one.
In the 3 weeks that you listened to Marnie, Katie, and Aaron, not once was the word special mentioned. People are addressed as people. There is no special. We all as human beings need essentially the same thing. And that really does begin with human relationship. That's not a special need, it's a universal need. I'm done.
I've heard a parent of a child who has a disability who was put into special education say it wasn't special and it wasn't education, which kind of gets at the lack of instruction and how it wasn't, so that's a parent's take on that.
And Paula said, really the best way to refer to someone is by name. So that's beautiful, right?
Yeah.
What else? All right. So thank you all very much. Honestly, thank you to Citizen Advocacy Atlanta DeKalb. Thank you to you guys in your congregation. Katie and I are honored to be able to come and speak to you guys, and for you guys to take the time to be with us. We are, both as well as Aaron and Verona are available if you have a burning question that you think of afterwards and you're like, man, I wish I would have asked that. Please reach out. All of us are available. And just, we really thank you guys for your attention and all of the paying attention, and good questions and comments. So we appreciate it.
Wow, thank you so much. What a special treat. We are so grateful. This has been a really unique and special opportunity. We appreciate your bringing it to us. Thank you to Citizen Advocacy of Atlanta and DeKalb. Yeah, as you mentioned, such close synergy and alignment. We are grateful. To extinguish the chalice, I have a brief reading, and okay, this one is from Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Thank you. Awesome. Well, we are grateful. And next week, there will be a break for the adult religious education classes. So we will not see you next week, but the following week, we hope you will join us. I'm just reminding myself as to what is coming up. Yeah, so coming up in 2 weeks on October 26th, we are working on a suicidal thoughts workbook. So it's cognitive behavioral therapy skills to reduce emotional pain, increase hope, and prevent suicide. So we've got an expert, Dr. Catherine H. Gordon, who will be joining us to present that topic. So we hope you have a wonderful 2 weeks. Of huge thank you once again. Thank you for making this possible, and thank you for being available for our ongoing questions in the future. Thank you so much, and a happy evening to all of you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Have a good one. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. All right. Well done. Thank you so much, Thomas. You can end the meeting for everyone. We are grateful.
I was just worried, like if I end it now, oh, I can stop recording. Okay, stop recording. Stop recording.